Good afternoon on what is a mild, grey and cloudy day. It is Thursday, the 6th of March. I'm in the reading Nook with a nice hot cup of tea. And I have a box to continue unboxing. In here, I've got a copy of the Fate core system. Characters live at the core of Fate. As a High Priestess of the Barbarian Hordes, an undead Wild West gunslinger, and a second lieutenant of the Intergalactic Security Forces are about as different as they come. But they've got one thing in common: they need a strong engine to drive their stories. Fate Core is their engine. Fate Core is the latest evolution of the award-winning Fate role-playing game system from Evil Hat Productions. We've streamlined and clarified the rules while maintaining the system's trademark flexibility. Name your game, Fate Core can make it happen. Inside, you'll discover easy-to-follow rules for character and world creation, rock-solid storytelling advice for players and GMs to produce the best player experience, clearly defined systems to guide players both new and old, new and improved approaches to character actions, aspects, compels, and more. Tell your tale, roll the dice, embrace your fate. Now, if you're wondering why this is appearing sort of out of sequence, as it were, it's because I missed a day. Or rather, I uploaded a video on the wrong day. It does very, very occasionally happen. So, Fate Core, published by Evil Hat Productions. This is derived ultimately from a role-playing game called Fudge, and uses the same dice as Fudge, but it's been developed into a storytelling role-playing game, first through Spirit of the Century, which is a pulp action game, highly regarded when it came out. It was quite groundbreaking, and this has essentially from that evolved into a generic role-playing game system which handles storytelling, sort of basically pulp action, and similar stories. Essentially, as you can tell by, the characters on the front, you've got a cop who can do magic. You've got a female warrior, and you've got a martial arts ape. Just to give you some idea of sort of the characters you can create in this game. In fact, you can create almost any character in the game because it's generic. So we've got the credits page, and then we get into the feedback heroes, essentially all the people who gave feedback on this edition. Contents page. And then we start off with the basics. Welcome to Fate, what you need to play, which is really essentially a character sheet, the Fudge dice, or Fate dice as they are now. You can get those very easily. And there, as you look down there, those dice are marked with pluses, minuses, and blanks. And they're six-sided dice other than that. You can use six-sided dice, but it's much more fun to use those Fate dice. Breakdown of the character sheet. Taking action here, you can see the dice rolls in basic dice faces, and the results in more clarity. So essentially what you're trying to do is roll better, get positive rather than negative results. And then everything is placed upon this ladder, which goes from terrible at -2 all the way up to legendary at +8. And that's basically rating for your various aspects of your character. So that will include, for example, if you have a look at the breakdown. Sorry if I missed this. Essentially, we've got players and game masters section introduction, and sort of like a sample game there, and a scene from that sample game. And essentially, this is a fantasy role-playing game, sort of, created in the setting and used as an example throughout. But essentially, skills and essentially are going to be here, are going to be rated using that ladder. But then anything can be rated as using that ladder, this ladder here. So that's environment as well as the player characters. How to interpret the results, and then the use of fate points, essentially a development of luck points, designed to be far more versatile, so you can invoke an aspect of your character or a setting to gain a benefit. You can have a story detail, but then if you've got an aspect, it can be compelled by by the game master. He will give you basically a token in return. So let me tell you where to go, where to start playing, and we get on to game creation. So, breakdown of what makes a good Fate game. Advice on basically the bullet points there on just the basics of creating your game, how to set it up and scale it. So what that means essentially is, how epic or personal the story is going to be. Is it a grand sweeping campaign, high fantasy or space opera, or is it down in the gutter adventures on the streets of your fantasy setting, or played out in a science or in a prison, that sort of thing. You had big issues for this setting. What's going to concern the player characters in, the big sweep of things and the setting as a whole. Making those down into aspects which can be invoked, tagged and so on, adding faces and places, making characters, and that's just the setup before we get into how to create your character. And then we work on from a character idea. You've got boxes out here which cover things such as when creating a character, think about this, keep building your setting at the same time, and then essentially dials everywhere. Fate core isn't the be all and end all of Fate. It's a starting point. As you get more familiar with the system, you'll be tempted to change things in order to suit your individual game. So basically dialing the different aspects up and down to suit your game on how you want to play it. So every player character has also got some trouble, the thing that's going to get them, bring them problems, and to think of it as disadvantages, that sort of thing. But it says there's a bright side to troubles. Is essentially it's going to be great for telling stories, and then the process is partially collaborative. So when you actually create a character, you're doing it with your friends, with the other players, and you are adding aspects to your character in the setting which connect your character to another player's character, and sort of telling the story of the background in the process. So there we have essentially, so we even have a point where we have phase 3, crossing paths again. We've got a worksheet with a fully worked out example. Then we move on to skills, and also stunts. Stunts are special moves that you can do. Stress and consequences is essentially how it handles damage in the game. It can be physical, mental stress, and that can vary from game to game. And that's it. Although there is you've got a quick character creation method as well. Then we delve into the setting proper. So we've got aspects and the fate points. So, they're talking about character aspects of things like Sucker for a Pretty Face, or Educated at the Academy of Blades, or My Father's Bloodstained Sword, or Proud Member of the Company of the Lords. So they can be quite varied and easily built into the setting, explanation of what aspects do, how to make a good aspect, and essentially the idea sort of like is that say more than one thing, the idea that, okay, it's not just one aspect of the setting you'll bring into play with that. It's got to have it's a little bit of flexibility to it. And then clearly phrase it. So, it's not ambiguous, as it were. Okay, and advice there if you get stuck on the process. And then he's giving an idea, essentially, if you've been talking about character creation, you're doing it together, ask your friends. And then how to invoke them. Essentially, this is essentially, giving you, you invoke them, cost you a fate point, and you might get a +2 to your skill, or give a +2 benefit to another character, and so on, or re-roll the dice. Simple as that. But they can also be compelled. So accept the complication and receive a fate point, pay a fate point to prevent the complication from happening. And it's generally better to accept the fate point because A, you want fate points to use your aspects for positive use, and you also, it leads to better storytelling. So it's discussion of types of compel and how they interact with the character, how to use aspects for role-playing, how to remove or change an aspect because the character can grow and change. And then we've got the discussion of the fate point economy, essentially the flow back and forth between the players and the game master and the game master and the players to effectively, keep fate points moving around, but not always get to the point where a player character is necessarily going to run out and not going to be able to do anything fantastic. But then we move on to skills and stunts. Discussion of how to define them, and they're going to be different from genre to genre. And then we've got stunts. Now, stunts are things essentially are special actions which the character can do. It might be backstab, fight with a dog, you're never safe, and it might be sort of like arcane expert or lead in the air, child of the court. So that it's you can see how the stunts can give the player character an advantage in the situation. Talking about things like families of stunts, how they can connect. And then we've got a default skill list. So, athletics, burglary, contacts, crafts, deceive, drive, empathy, fight, investigate, law, notice, physique, provoke, rapport, resources, shoot, stealth, and will. And there we go. That's the list of the base skills and what they can do. They're very broad, but that's fine. And then we've got an explanation of how they work. Over and over, essentially going to them in depth. Deceive, and a fantastic illustration. I mean, this is one of my favourites, just for deceive. It's just that pulling that mask off, revealing the ape face underneath. It's fantastically pulpy. So, yeah, the artwork is fantastic in here, and it really does a nice job of illustrating the different aspects of the rules. Like this is investigate. The idea, essentially what we've got there is, a cop doing a standard set of investigation, and he's performing magic. It's just sort of showing you what the rules are sort of supposed to encompass, and that's quite a lot. And this book is actually, I have reviewed it in the past. I've read it, and it's really very readable. It's accessible, and there's the physique skill. And it's just pile of gold or coins for resources. And each one, so for example, I'm going to point out that you also got essentially the means you can how they can use, which is overcome, create advantage, attack or defend. But you've also got stunts. So they're the drive stunts. So for drive stunts, you've got hard to shake, pedal to the metal, ramming speed. Where were we? Physique, grappler, take the blow, tough as nails. Resources, money talks, savvy investor, trust fund, baby. So looking at each of these in turn, and it's really what I like about the organisation. It really is just it doesn't present too much information on the page. It's nicely spread out, easy to read, and accessible. So that's all the skills. Then we get into actions and outcomes. This is the sort of putting all of this into practice. How to roll the dice, how to interpret the dice in different situations, interpret the results, and essentially really divides it into 4 types of actions, which is, as I say, overcome, create an advantage, and that's to give the essentially an advantage for generally for the rest of the party, which they can take advantage of, to basically give a bonus. Attack and defend. So overcome tends to be sort of like can be anything from social interaction to solving a problem like picking a lock or finding a cure for a disease, that sort of thing. And of course, attack and defender are obvious. Challenges, conflicts, and contests. So when you zoom down into the action, first one let's get into is contests. So handle basically, you know, this could be anything from a race, a chase, that sort of thing. Conflicts versus basically fights. Got some great action scenes there. This is how you're really handling combat. How to resolve the attacks. And then looking at the consequences you might suffer when you begin to take stress and damage. And even what happens when you have to concede the conflict. So, you know, you're heroes, but there are points where you might lose. I'm talking about advantages in combat and teamwork with, again, a great illustration. And then for the game master, how to run the game. And what do? You know, basically, and it just says here, drama is better than realism. This is essentially as I say, it tends to be slightly towards pulp action. So yeah, drama is better than realism. What to do during game creation, what you do during play. Really good advice here, as I recall, when to roll the dice. And how to make failure awesome. You know, basically, blaming the circumstances have succeeded at cost. How to work around sort of like, you know, okay, you haven't succeeded, but, and let the player do the work, you know, come up with something else. And then how to deal, at the same time, how to deal with extraordinary success. And yes, so essentially, what have you gained extra to you just doing what you set out to do, you know. That can be sometimes a little bit more challenging to create on the fly. And then you move into essentially dealing with time, telescoping in and out of the action, out of the scene, moving time along with story time, and then going back into action time as necessary. Should I say zoom in, zoom out. How to judge the use of skills and stunts. How to deal with conflicts and other weird stuff. And environmental hazards. And then, again, discussing aspects in more depth and detail. So essentially invocations, compels, and so on. And it's basically got a section here on weak source compels, where, you know, basically you're not really doing a compel for any great effect. And then how to create the opposition. And this is in addition, essentially, this is the basics. There are lots of toolkits you can pick up to cover these aspects. So there is an adversary toolkit. So here we start off with different types of NPCs. So we move from nameless NPCs through to mobs. And basically the idea that perhaps, hey, nameless NPCs are obstacles. So you might have, you know, a crowd of zombies you've got to get through, or just a crowd supporting NPCs. Just trying to get the page. There we go. Then we have main NPCs. In each case, we've got these examples as well. And then how to play them, how to portray them. And then scenes, sessions, and scenarios. How to define a scenario, identify its problems, connect problems to character aspects and game aspects, and so on. So basically, so you you're sort of setting bits of elements of the story up ahead. You know, if the characters want to engage with that, ask questions about your story. And then we move on to establishing the opposition, using the stats and so on and details given earlier in the book. Set up the first scene. And it's got suggestions here with powerful session starting Ninja GM trick. So really good, full of good advice, how to define further scenes, including also how to end them. And then they're using the pillars of competence, proactivity, and drama, and to hit their aspects. You know, bring the elements of the character into play as the scenario plays on. And then how to resolve the scenario, bring it to a close. And then we scale up again. We move on to the long game. So defining arcs and campaigns. So we've got story arcs here as well as campaigns, how to advance the story and enact change through it, defining milestones where the player characters will achieve something which can be minor or significant. Oh, sorry, minor, significant, and major. Sorry, I was wondering whether they were. I can't remember whether they had major or not. World advancement in the process. You know, have the player characters change the world? Has something else changed the world? And then we've got explanation of different, so essentially, effects that they can have. How to handle NPCs in the setting. And we've got a chapter of extras. So how to define extras, creating an extra, essentially how to define them as characters. And essentially got an examples here. Extra is the Collegia Arcana Magic. So it's example is an organization. And then we've got more examples of extras. So it can be weapon and armor ratings, superpowers, special gear. I mean, all depending upon the nature of the setting, cyber tech and super skills, wealth, and even media, vehicles, locations, and organizations. And something more personal, like LucasArts, a spirit of warding, school of power. So lots of really nice examples here. And then at the end, we've got a cheat sheet for the basics of the rules, a veteran's guide too, and then the sheets necessary to get the game started. And then some sample characters. So that you could leap into play automatically with those characters with their setting if you wanted to, and their index. And also comes with a Fate core system bookmark, which has got a bit of a summary on the back of it. So that's nice and useful. And there's something I've forgotten in here. I've actually got a little piece of artwork from something else, from the Lazarus comic from Image Comics, which has slipped in there somehow. So that is the Fate core system from Evil Hat Productions. Underlies a lot of kind of generic storytelling, role-playing, but it's a really solid game system and nicely supported with a range of different genre books and generic but well done source books and toolkits. Anyway, I do hope you enjoyed this unboxing in the Nook. If you did, then please do click on the like button down below. And of course, if you've got any comments or feedback, I do appreciate you taking the time to post those. And lastly, if you want to be alerted to yet more unboxings in the Nook, where you'll see me out here with a box containing a book or game or role-playing supplement that I will unbox and chat about to the best extent of my knowledge for roughly 10 minutes or so. all accompanied by a nice hot cup of tea, then please do click on the subscribe button down below. Thanks again for watching another unboxing the Nook. I will be back again soon with another one. Bye for now.